Wednesday on Ag News Daily.
That's the problem with China. You don't know. They're very good at controlling their information. Our best theory is that the central government has come out and said we need to be more self-sufficient, less reliant on the world, and this includes grains. So how do you produce more grains? You fertilize more.
Well, listeners, welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. You've got Tanner and Michelle this week, so welcome back to the news portion of the podcast.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Blaine and I are at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Convention in Kansas City, so it's been great to connect with our other people and some experts in the industry we'll hear shortly.
Well, I'm excited to get a hold of the content that you guys have put together because I missed out and might have a little FOMO at the moment.
Hey, you are living the life in Iowa? Is that the case?
That's right. We did have a little bit of rain up here, and we're super foggy this morning. Rainfall from this week is expected, though, to continue through the weekend with a much larger system that is predicted to develop next week. This upcoming storm is likely to bring more widespread precipitation. In addition, the ongoing active weather pattern should alleviate these drought conditions and will improve that soil moisture profile, especially ahead of those growers that are planting winter wheat. As we look into the northern plains, recent showers have impacted the eastern Dakotas, but a more significant storm is expected to bring heavier and more widespread precipitation next week. Temperatures will remain above normal until larger storm systems arrive, which will bring a noticeable temperature drop. The drought conditions that have been worsening overall, though severity varies a lot by region. If the anticipated storm materializes, it could provide some much needed relief. We're also seeing a chance of snow in the forecast for parts of the Midwest and Corn Belt. But of course, as always, Michelle, those are long-range forecasts, so we will see what happens when the systems and those dates get closer to us.
It's almost Thanksgiving in the middle of November, so it makes me question, will we have a white Christmas? That is something I love in Wisconsin. But where are you at weather-wise in Iowa?
Yeah, we would love to see a white Christmas as well, but until then, I think I'd rather it just stay nice.
Very true. Well, harvest is almost complete as we head into the middle of November. 95% of the nation's corn crop has been harvested, up 4% from last week. The 5-year average is 84%. 96% of the soybean crop has been harvested, up 2% from last week, up from the 5-year average of 91%. When I was driving back from Wisconsin to Iowa to Kansas City here, many fields were left empty. There were only a few of corn and soybean left. So it's great to see that most of the harvest is wrapped up.
That's right. You are exactly right. Kind of feel the same sentiment here in our area. But back to talking Mexico, the U.S. food and agricultural sales to Mexico surged by 7% in the 2024 fiscal year, making Mexico the top destination for U.S. ag products, according to the Census Bureau data. That was all tracked by the USDA. China fell into third place behind Canada in export purchases. Shipments to Mexico totaled $30 billion, an increase of $2 billion from 2023. With purchases that included a record 24.5 million metric tons of corn, 40% of all U.S. corn exports for the year. Canada purchased $29 billion and China $25.7 billion worth of U.S. ag and food products. Together, Mexico and Canada accounted for 1/3 of the total $173 billion in U.S. food and ag exports. Both countries are expected to remain the top two markets in 2025, with China staying in third place. Brazil, meanwhile, has captured a larger share of China's ag import market, as we've reported. Just shows there, Michelle, the importance of that Mexico and Canadian relationship with the U.S.
Especially with the new president coming next year, there was a lot of speculation here. What will trades and tariff look like in the United States to our other countries? So it'll be interesting what will actually happen come January. But the American Farm Bureau Federation voted this week to expel the Illinois Farm Bureau from the organization following a membership dispute that has unfolded over the past few weeks, which has led to the state filing a lawsuit against AFBF. This conflict stems from a decision made by Country Financial in September, which eliminated the requirement for non-farmers in Illinois to hold a membership in the Illinois Farm Bureau to obtain insurance. As a result, the AFBF board voted in a meeting to terminate IFB's membership effective December 20th. The vote took place on November 12th after a failed mediation attempt between AFBF leadership and IFB officials, including IFB President Brian Duncan. In a November 12th email to State Farm Bureau President, AFBF President Zippy DeWolf explained the decision was based on IFB's choice to allow Country Financial, an affiliate company it controls, to drop the membership requirement for non-farm policyholders in Illinois. Expulsion from AFBF will mean Illinois Farm Bureau loses its national voting delegates and any influence over federal farm policy advocacy. In addition, it could potentially lose the right to use the Farm Bureau name. But this is not the first time that AFBF has lost a state Farm Bureau. The Alabama Farmers Federation left AFBF in 1981 and rejoined in 2005. In a statement last week, AFBF reiterated that it had no intention of leaving AFBF and values its partnership. So what will come end of December, will that, right now as it stands, it happens, what will that look like? It'll be interesting to follow this story.
That's right. We will certainly keep an eye on that for our listeners, especially our Illinois listeners themselves. AGCO CEO Eric Hansodi stated in their recent investor call that the company currently has about 4 months worth of orders with its North American dealers and aims to reduce that to 3 months on orders. Manufacturers generally are seeking to optimize their inventory levels to avoid extra costs and storage fees. Looking to become more efficient, he says that AGCO plans to continue underproducing retail demand and focus on improving market share, execution, bringing their dealer inventories in line with their target sales. Competitors, John Deere, which is Deere & Co., and CNH, have also scaled back their production and reduced workforce numbers this year to adapt to the slowing market. While tractor and combine sales are down, manufacturers expect precision ag sales to grow as farmers are looking for ways to increase their yields and upgrade their machinery with reduced operational costs. So interesting to see the supply chain becoming more efficient, or at least more on-time deliveries, Michelle.
Mm-hmm. And talking about, John Deere with what's happening with tariffs, Congress is back in session this week for the lame duck session. Like I mentioned, we're here at the NAFB Convention, National Association of Farm Broadcasting, and we heard from some ag industry leaders hearing their thoughts on what the Farm Bill timeline will look like. Let's hear from them now.
There are plans for January and February on taxes and things like that. This team has things to do. And doing a farm bill and starting from scratch is not one of them, nor should it be. There's an opportunity here. I think that Dems are going to get a lot more reasonable about some of the SNAP provisions that have been, let's say maybe a little bit hyperbolic about the impact of some of those cuts. This is a fair farm bill. This is a good farm bill. Ag groups like it. G.T. Thompson did the work. It is time to get it passed, clear the decks, and start fresh in the next Congress.
Every lame duck has a list of 10,000 things that are going to get done. National Defense reauthorization has to get done. Appropriations have to get done. If you can get through those two things, then I think you got a chance at a farm bill. But we've talked, and I've sat in on the panels, we talk about 70% of rural America voted for Donald Trump. That isn't 70% of the ag vote. The ag vote is just a small part of rural America. And so the rural America voted because of social issues. And so how does that translate to going ahead and increasing reference prices? I don't see it. If we need to figure out how we're going to be able to do this. I think there's enough time, but you got two big things that have to get done first.
Speculation is building around potential nominees for the next USDA Secretary of Agriculture, with several agricultural publications weighing in on the possibilities.
That's right. We've also seen President-elect Donald Trump being very busy. He's been busy announcing his cabinet and advisor picks at a record pace. Farm Journal reported that 15 potential candidates for the USDA secretary role was based upon their sources. The full list can be seen in our show notes, but a few include Trump donor who led the 2024 Rural Campaign Coalition, Charles Herbster, the Texas Ag Commissioner, Sid Miller. Miller served 6 terms as the Texas House of Representatives from 2001 to 2013 and was first elected as the Ag Commissioner there in 2014 with re-elections in 18 and 2022. Other potential candidates include former House Ag Committee Chairman Mike Conway, the current Chairman Representative Glenn Thompson. Of course, we've talked already about Zippy Duvall, the president of the American Farm Bureau Federation, is also considered in the mix. Ted McKinney, CEO of the National Association of State Departments of Ag, and North Dakota's Governor Doug Burgum are the ones being considered. It is worth noting that Trump's previous USDA Secretary nomination, Sonny Perdue, was not announced until January 19th, just a day before his inauguration and more than 2 months after the election. He's also selected former New York Congressman Lee Zeldin as his nominee for EPA administrator. Zeldin, who served in the U.S. House of Representatives, has a history of weighing in on key ag and environmental issues. In 2017, he co-sponsored bills that targeted the renewable fuel standard, including one bill that sought to repeal the RFS altogether and another that proposed removing corn ethanol from the RFS mandate. Additionally, in April of 2018, Zeldin publicly opposed the Paris Agreement in the current content form, aligning with Trump's position to withdraw U.S. from the international climate record. Throughout his time in Congress, Zeldin is consistently opposing biofuels in the RFS, including Trump's first term. At the end of Barack Obama's administration, his stance had drawn attention, especially given that Zeldin has received significant political contributions from oil and gas, accounting for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting event earlier this week, many agricultural industry experts shared that their thoughts on Zeldin's nomination led to the EPA with discussions focused on how his policies might impact ag and biofuels. So let's get a couple of those quotes right now.
So Lee Zeldin, former Congressman Zeldin, first of all, doesn't have a huge long track record on environmental issues. He wasn't on any committees of jurisdiction that oversaw EPA. So I think there's a lot of things we don't quite know yet. But he did co-sponsor legislation to reduce RFS volumes, also prevent any ethanol blends higher than E10. This was back when he was in Congress, 2015, 17, and has largely been critical of the RFS. And so when it comes to things like corn and soy and these domestic markets, I think there is a huge risk that EPA could step back from its commitment to renewable fuels over the next 4 years. That could be returning to the practice of granting small refinery exemptions, which undercut the program. I think that biofuels can be a bipartisan issue, and I hope I'm wrong about this, but the incoming EPA administrator doesn't have the best track record when it comes to supporting biofuels, and I think that is a concern.
I agree. He doesn't have the background, and he hasn't been helpful to us. But I think in every administration, when you sign up to be the Secretary of Ag, the head of EPA, the Secretary of State, you sign up to say yes, sir, to the president, and I think that's an even stronger requirement now. So I think a bigger question is going to be, are we considerably worried that President Trump won't be as supportive of biofuels as Lee Zeldin?
The price discovery period for harvest prices used to determine crop insurance indemnities for revenue products concluded here at the end of October. In 2024, the harvest price for corn is $4.16 per bushel, which is 11% lower than the projected price of $4.66. Similarly, the harvest price for soybeans is $10.03 per bushel, 13% below the projected price of $11.55. These price declines for corn and soybeans in 2024 are not large enough to trigger individual farm revenue coverage payments, even at the highest coverage level of 85%. However, area-based revenue plans such as the Area Risk Protection Insurance and supplemental and enhanced coverage options provide higher county-based coverage levels. These plans could trigger payments in some counties even if county yields exceeded expectations. For individual revenue insurance policy, the price drops of 11% for corn and 13% for soybeans are insufficient to trigger payments even at the maximum coverage of 85%. In order for indemnities to be paid on individual revenue products, farms would need to experience yield losses relative to their actual production history yields.
And we started today's broadcast off talking about rain and the soil moisture levels. We're also talking water levels on the Mississippi River this week. They have rebounded considerably from the rainfall that we've been receiving throughout the Midwest region. And that has happened through late October and the first part of November. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, the recent lowest level river gauge in St. Louis was below 2.7 feet in the middle of October, while the lowest level in the Memphis area being 10.38 feet on November 3rd. The U.S. Coast Guard has lifted restrictions on the lower Mississippi River for barge transportation. Barge companies have increased their operating draft due to its increased water depth. The number of barges attached together to form a single unit because of the increased water in this channel. This time of year, especially for the month of November, it is game time for shipping soybeans and getting soybeans to export. So having major link in the supply chain, the Mississippi River, back at operating levels, the executive director of Soy Transportation Coalition, Mike Steenhoek, says that the transportation right now returning to normal capacity is a most welcoming development. So quite interesting to see how much this rain is having a positive effect during the right time of year, Michelle.
And it'll be interesting to watch what that will do for prices and what that support will look like these coming weeks. But while we were here at, like mentioned, at the NAFB convention, we heard from someone that we talk about often, Josh Linville of StoneX. So instead of sharing about a fertilizer update, we hear from him in person. Delaney has more, so let's hear it from her.
Super excited to be catching up with Josh Linville, the Vice President of Fertilizer for StoneX, a familiar voice and face on the podcast. Josh, thanks for joining again.
Absolutely. I had to go really, really far. This drive was like 10 minutes.
Well, we love having you in person when we can, so we're lucky to have you here with us at convention. The big question mark right now, right, is what's going to happen in 2025 with the incoming administration as related to the fertilizer markets, as we were talking about before we hit record. I was kind of curious to know, is there going to be an impact with President Trump stepping in, specifically related to fertilizer?
Yeah, for some reason people think that the incoming administration might be different or the same or whatever. It's been a talking point. Our take is, obviously, we need to wait and see what actually plays out. It certainly seems like the first time he was in office, it was a little bit more reaction. It's almost like, holy crap, I won this election? I don't know what to do now. This time he's coming in a full head of steam. He's coming in a sprint. So probably a little bit more idea, strategy, and things like that. But we know that Trump is pro-tariff. He uses this as a weapon. He uses this as a tool. And so one of our big things is right now we've already got tariffs on China. Those were placed during his first administration. We have tariffs on Russia and Morocco phosphate. That was during the Biden administration. Our big fear today is that if Trump and Putin start butting heads, there's a little bit of respect, a mutual, I don't want to say likeness or relationship friendliness at all, but there's at least respect. But if Trump comes in and is like, you need to get out of Ukraine, and Putin's like, no, I won't, and they start butting heads, we could see Trump very quickly start putting tariffs on Russia, which could include potash, which could include nitrogen. That would just reduce the amount of supply available to U.S. farmers from around the world once again. We don't know this. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out, but that is one of the biggest worries that we have. It's probably the U.S.-Russia relationship.
When we look then at maybe some of the other things playing out right now, I feel like Russia-Ukraine is, I don't want to say on the back burner, but it's certainly maybe not stealing as much attention as it was at one time. Something that is still somewhat in the limelight and then maybe it backs away is the Israel-Hamas situation. What's going on there? How's that impacting the fertilizer markets today?
Fortunately, nothing yet. But what we're worried about is that thing spilling out beyond those borders. It's the Middle East as a whole. When you look at that small part of the map, when you look at North Africa and the Middle East, 1 out of every 2 tons of urea exports from that small part of the map. So if we start to see that expand beyond, and this is where we've seen the other countries, especially Iran, as they start to participate and they have a little bit of a, I'll attack you, you do a revenge, and we'll go back and forth on each other. If that gets out of hand, we're putting a lot of nitrogen in jeopardy. Iran specifically, they just got done with a lot of sanctions. They're kind of returning to the fertilizer market on those. A lot of people don't know, Iranian exports of urea, about the same size as China. So if that continues, if it gets into a bigger war and we start cutting off Iran once again, we're losing a major, major supplier of nitrogen to the world.
India, China, anything noteworthy there to mention?
China, again, one of the biggest exporters of urea and phosphate in the world, their urea exports have been non-existent this year. And there's very little sign they're going to return in Q4 or Q1. Phosphate, we're worried they're going to do the same thing. It's all a central government decision. It has nothing to do with the industry. It's what the central government wants or doesn't want. So we're very fearful they're going to start doing the same thing on phosphate. India just secured 1 million ton for their West Coast ports of urea on this last purchase tender. They probably don't need to return to the marketplace again until probably very late 24, late December 24, or very early 25. But what we saw with this last purchase, they wiped out a lot of excess inventory around the world. The market's probably going to go quiet for about 4 to 6 weeks, but once we start looking at 2025 on the calendar, there's a lot of buying that has to happen, and I don't think there's a lot of excess tons. We're getting nervous that there's going to be some fireworks coming in January, February that could spell higher pricing.
I want to come back to that, but you mentioned China not seeing a lot of urea exports at all. What's kind of the maybe story behind why that's happening?
That's the problem with China. You don't know. They're very good at controlling their information. Our best theory is that the central government has come out and said we need to be more self-sufficient, less reliant on the world, and this includes grains. So how do you produce more grains? You fertilize more. So this 5 to 5.5 million tons that they would normally export, folks are thinking they've just increased their application rate and they're just using it internally. Some people have scoffed at that and said, oh, there's no way a country can just all of a sudden use 5 extra million ton. They forget about the scope of size of China, and they forget about how they do it. Yes, for an American farmer who's using very technologically advanced spreader equipment, air machines, things like that, yeah, it's very hard to see that kind of an increase. In China, they're throwing it out of bags with their hand. It's not that hard to think a country of their size is bumping up their rates that much more because the government has told them you need to raise more, put on more fertilizer. It's, yes, sir, you do what they say. So we don't believe we're going to see them back. We think that they are using everything domestically. They want to be less reliant on the world. It almost feels like they're preparing for something, to me personally. But that goes down a conspiracy theory rabbit hole. We don't have time for that.
No, we don't. Maybe after maybe over drinks sometime,
Yes.
right? We can get into that. So where we're at here today, you mentioned was a little quiet, making you a little nervous, and there might be some fireworks to come in 2025. What's going on or not going on that's making you nervous right now?
It is November 14th, and from everybody I have talked to across the Corn Belt, we have barely turned a wheel for fertilizer. Talking to my dad here a couple of days ago, he didn't finish up his harvest until Tuesday evening. The soil has not been cool enough to start with anhydrous. It has not been dry enough to get dry machines out in the field. So we've done very, very little. We're already halfway through November. That isn't to sit there and say we think fall is a failure and we need to start thinking about how in the world are we going to get this done in the spring. But it's going up of our list very, very quickly. If we have an extremely poor fall, that demand doesn't disappear. It's now going to be there in January, in February, in March. Our calendar gets very, very narrow, and there's only so many logistical paths to move this product. So we're not sounding the sirens just yet, but our hand is near the button.
So logistics is one part of the equation, but the other is, do growers have those needs pre-booked, or are we also going to see panic at the last minute thinking I didn't get it done in the fall because of weather or whatever? Now we're in the springtime needing to get work done. Logistically is one question if you can get product, but also are we going to have enough product? Is that a concern to you right now as well?
Yeah, we think that buying patterns have been a little bit more conservative, and rightfully so. Farm economics for 2024 have been poor. Grain prices are down significantly. The best thing we have going is a lot of the yield that we've been hearing out there are better than what was expected. Not a great farm economic year. You go ahead to 2025, you start looking at those numbers. Again, you're hopeful you can farm for payments. There's not a lot of profit to be made. So in that type of situation, it doesn't get you excited to want to go lock in all your inputs because you're like, great, I'm going to lock in nothing. So everybody has been a little bit more conservative. Let's wait and see what happens. And that's great if it can force the market down, but unfortunately it hasn't. And now, again, you talk about that calendar. We're in the middle of fall season. Your chance of resupply has dwindled significantly. And when we think about spring, oh, we've got all the winter to think about. April is so far away. No, it's not. You've got what? December, January, February, March? You've got 4 months, and all of a sudden you are sitting in the middle of spring. It is April 1st. So we are losing time very, very quickly. There's a reason why we see the market have a good fall run and a good spring run, because we need it logistically to get everything moved in a timely manner. It's going to be very difficult to move everything into one season.
The other thing you mentioned with the tighter economics, right, is I've started to talk to some farmers who are considering maybe less fertilizer, or do they really need it next year, knowing that margins are going to be even tighter probably than what we've seen this year? In some of your conversations and what you're hearing out in farm country, do you think we're going to see a reduction in fertilizer input overall because of those tighter margins?
I think especially on phosphate we will. However, I will say I think it's going to be less demand destruction than we thought originally. This summer, it was a major talking point of ours. The price of phosphate was high historically. It was high versus grains. Any way you looked at phosphate, it was high price. There was nothing to get excited about. And so we thought that was going to be the first thing cut from these plants. But as we've continued to hear through harvest, yields are big. They have more bushels to go market for profit. The grain prices aren't as low as they were at the bottom. And the big yields means nutrient removal. And if you want to raise a big crop next year, you have to replace those nutrients. Whether or not you need it, that is a great question that needs to be asked for every single acre that you own. But when you go to start making those decisions, make those decisions based on what the numbers are telling you and not based on emotion. We can't go sit there and look at it and say, oh, the price is high, I'm not putting anything on. That's emotion making that decision. If your soil tests come back and say, hey, you've got pretty good phosphate levels, you could probably lower that a little bit this year and not hurt your yield. That's exactly what the market is asking you to do. Just don't cut your nose off to spite your face, right? We need to make sure we're making sound, fundamental marketing decisions.
Josh, as we look to 2025, is there anything else on your radar that should be on our listeners' radar as well?
It's just not going to be easy. Unfortunately, I keep looking for the day when I can jump on one of these interviews and say, guys, it's a slam dunk, and it's just going to be so simple. You're going to throw a rock into a lake and you're going to hit water, right? It's that type of situation. It's not. We need to make sure we are diligent. Don't put our head in the sand and be upset and just refuse to look at the market. These are the times you need to have more conversations with your supplier, your agronomist. Figure out what I can and can't do. Really dive into the details of the farm. They always talk about what the difference is between the upper level and the lower level of the farm. It's not that much different. It's just those little details. So when you see an opportunity to lock in a profit, don't get married to the idea, well, it could get better. And if I sell a layer now, I won't be able to sell that for more money later. Take what the market gives you when the opportunity is there, and it may be there for a minute, an hour, a day. Don't sit on it. And frankly speaking, if you lock in a layer, it's profitable. And you come to me next time this year, we're back in Kansas City, and we're having the same interview, and everybody's like, I've listened to him, I did a layer, and it was profitable, and it was the worst one I did. I'll take that yelling all day long, because that means you had a great year.
Absolutely. Well, Josh, thanks again for your time. Always appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That's great. It's always good to get Josh's perspective, Michelle. Sounds like you and Delaney have been busy down there at NAFB. Again, maybe a little FOMO on my part, but excited to jump on the news with you here. Wanted to give the listeners a little bit of an update. The week of Thanksgiving, there will not be an Ag News Daily Show. So if you're looking for us there, giving you a heads up that will not be taking place. But still, we'll come back with even more great content after then. We'll be here next week, but the week to follow, like we said, we'll be taking a little bit of a break, Michelle.
And that'll be fun to celebrate with our families. And in the meantime, we'll sure to see some of the stories that do impact what we're eating at Thanksgiving. So I don't know if you have what you're planning yet for Thanksgiving, but I am really excited for those mashed potatoes.
Yeah, but I have to think about what's going to be on our menu this year. Maybe we'll share that next week. But what a good show today. Thanks for joining me, Michelle. But what do you say for today? We let the listeners go.
Let's let them go.